Welcome to the Lax Goalie Rat Podcast. Every week, we'll be talking shop with lacrosse goalies, coaches, and special guests. This is the Lax Goalie Rat Podcast. Now your host, Coach Damon Wilson.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Lax Goalie Rat Podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to the position of lacrosse goalie, and I am your host, Coach Damon Wilson. We took a couple weeks off for Thanksgiving and some traveling that I did, but we are back this week, and I've got an interview with Mike Gabel. For those that have never heard of Mike, he's an ex-pro goalie who spent a lot of time in the MLL with the Bayhawks, the Rattlers, and the Machine. He's in the University of Vermont Athletic Hall of Fame for his play as a goalie while there. So this might be the first Hall of Fame goalie that we have on the podcast. He now runs a great lacrosse company called True Lacrosse. We get into that in today's episode. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Mike Gabel. Before we get into today's episode, I want to read a message from our sponsor, and that is my own online lacrosse goalie camp. Just this last Thanksgiving, I went out and recorded a bunch more videos, drills, demonstration techniques, and I'm adding that to the camp right now. But you know what? That's to make it even better. Those who have gone through the camp have had nothing but praise for the coaching and the drills and everything that you learn. So if you're a parent out there and you want to understand what your kid is going through, what they need to do to become an elite goalie, get this camp. It's available at laxgoalierat.com/goal. That's laxgoalierat.com/goal. My next guest on the Lax Goalie Rat podcast is Mike Gabel. Mike's a ex-MLL goalie and currently runs the creator and currently runs True Lacrosse. Mike, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to kind of hear the story of how your lacrosse goalie career got started, all the way back at the beginning, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Massachusetts, in Falmouth, Massachusetts. I moved there when I was in fifth grade, and I started playing hockey. It was a big hockey town back in the day, and started playing lacrosse in seventh grade. And when I started playing lacrosse, I was a midfielder / attackman. You know, just like any other player, they want to be the one scoring goals. And when I was a sophomore in high school, my high school coach pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, Mike, do you want to be on varsity this year?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, coach." And he goes, "Well, we need a backup goalie, and we need somebody to jump in the cage during practice, or just in case for games. Was that something you would be open to doing?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so my sophomore year, I would do that. I would actually be dressed as an attackman or midfielder at practice, and then when coach said, "Hey, we got to go full field," Gabel, jump in the goal. And so I would jump in. And so I never even played in a game my sophomore year as a goaltender, but just only in practice. And then going from sophomore year to junior year, the goalie that was on the team graduated, and I was going to be the only goalie on the team. And so I went to a camp at Brown University and just kind of really kind of owned the position, because it was kind of like my responsibility for the following year. And then ended up doing really, really well. And immediately that first year was kind of like a ranked goalie in the state, and got all conference honors, and did really, really well. And so that's what kind of sparked me starting to play goalie, which is kind of late in the game. Obviously, like nowadays, kids start playing lacrosse when they're, like 7 years old now. And so, for me to kind of switch positions sophomore year, that was kind of late. So that's kind of how it really kicked off, and how I started playing goalie.
That's great. What was it at that Brown camp, do you think, that you learned that made you advance so rapidly? Was it just kind of putting some structure and some knowledge to like your athletic ability, or is there something else?
Yeah. So the goalie that we had on our team my sophomore year, who was the senior, was really, really good. And so when we were in practice, or like even before a game, I would get warmed up, and I would just I didn't know any better, and so I just did exactly what he did. And so when I was in goal, I would just kind of I'm a big visual learner, so I would mimic everything that he did in the goal. And then ironically, when I went to camp, one of the coaches immediately said, "Hey man, you're doing everything wrong." And I was like, "Oh, well, I was just doing what the other goalie was doing." He's like, "Well, I don't know how he was very successful because a lot of the stuff is like wrong." So I was like, dipping my hands a bunch, and I really didn't have a good stance. And so the coach, spent a lot of time critiquing me, which I was a big fan of. Like I've always been a guy that, like, anytime somebody gives me feedback, I really, really welcome it, even though it might sting at first. And so I think, like, after getting coached up, it gave me a lot of confidence. And then once I started playing in games or utilized it at the camp, my confidence level went kind of through the roof. Now I realize that wow, this is like what I need to do to be good. So that kind of piqued my drive to continue with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think one of the things I was talking with Jesse Miller in the podcast with him is he was saying that, out of all positions, goalie especially, like once you get your confidence, like once you figure it out and it clicks, they can really progress very rapidly. And it sounds like that was the exact case for you. Like you learned a few things and got your confidence, and then boom.
Yeah, well, what's funny is I tell younger goalies this, that typically the best player, but what's considered the best player on the team is the guy that scores the most goals, and that player could potentially score 3 or 4 goals a game, okay, at the highest, at the most usually. And a goalie, so everybody's cheering for that kid 4 times. A goalie can make 15, 20 saves in a game. People are cheering for the goalie way more than that offensive scorer. So it's kind of a big immediate gratification when you do something well. Your team gets behind you, and it's contagious and a little addicting that to have everybody get excited for you.
Yeah, well, you don't have to convince me that goalie is the most important position on the field. I'm already with you. But that is a great point.
Yeah.
That I think sometimes teams do tend to, let's say, value or even celebrate goals a little bit more than they do stops. Like I'm a firm believer that each defensive stop is the defense's goal, if you will, right? And that same level of hugging and pats on the butt should be applied.
Right. Absolutely. I would agree.
Yeah. What, how would you describe, I don't know if you still play these days, maybe in some club ball, but when you played, how would you describe your style of play?
So I think that my biggest thing is, I always wanted to have the most field presence whenever I stepped on the field. So a lot of communication, which leads to, kind of like a lot of support from your defenseman. If you're talking a lot, your defensemen rally around that and get excited.
Yeah.
I think it kind of sometimes intimidates the other team. You end up becoming like your voice, and you project, and you end up becoming bigger than you really are. I stand a little bit taller in my stance. Hands out in front of my body. I would take I was always a big fan of having a really deep arc, pretty much like my heels are on the goal line. I never really wanted to come out. I always believed that I'd rather know where the landmarks are, like the post, versus getting lost in a high arc. So those are kind of the touch points. I think even though I coach goalies to tell them to always stay on their feet, ironically, I think I was kind of a flopper. Whenever I would make a save, I'd always on a low shot, I'd end up on the ground somehow. And even though I tell goalies not to do that, it's do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. But that was kind of those are some of the, I think, kind of points of my stance.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It just goes to show there's so many different styles out there, and anyone can be successful. And that's great what you said about do as I say, not as I do, because I've talked with a lot of pro goalies, and I asked them about that. Is that something you coach? Just kind of throwing your body at the ball? And no, not at all. It's just in the heat of the moment.
Yeah,
you kind of do what you need to do to make that save, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Who are some of your lacrosse goalie idols, and what kind of things did you learn from them?
So I know that when I was when I was going into going into college. So when I was going to be a freshman, I took like a drive across the country, and it ended in like New Jersey at the Final Four, where they were having the Final Four. It was held at Rutgers, and I remember being at the game and watching Trevor Tierney play and thinking, man, I want to be like that. I want to be playing, in these big games like this. And it was kind of, I know he was somebody when I was just going to be a freshman that I was like looking at and saying, wow, like this guy's really good, and want to be a part of that. That's when Princeton was, really starting to go on their runs of winning championships. And then when I was in college, and then post college, Tillman Johnson, who played at Virginia, and then when I was in the MLL, Tillman Johnson played for Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles. I forget what their mascot was, but when LA had a team, the Riptide, I think it was. He was somebody that I played against and really idolized, and it was really, really cool when I played, in games, and he was on the other sideline, or he was in the other goal, and I was in one goal, and it was really, really cool, to be playing at the highest level of lacrosse and be on the same field as him. So I think those are two guys that I kind of idolized when I was growing up, just because I wanted to kind of mimic some of their style of play, and kind of like the sense of confidence that they played with and so forth. So those are two of the guys that I looked up to.
Cool. Very cool. And as you, as you move from high school to college into the MLL, did your game change or evolve at all? Or did you pretty much stick with that same style that we talked about earlier throughout those different levels?
Yeah. So, I think it definitely did change. I think that I started playing more of a deeper arc when I was playing in the MLL, just because of the speed of the shots, and there being a 2-point arc, you kind of want more time to react to the ball, and have it be a little bit further out, versus the higher arc you play when somebody shoots a 2-pointer, the closer you are to the line. And so I'd rather have more time. I think that was one thing. I started bringing my hands closer together. So if you see a picture of me when I was in college, my hands were really far apart. And then when I was playing in the MLL, I brought my hands together a little bit more, just because of the speed of the shots. And one of the things that I've always done is talk to goalies that I played against or that were on my team, and just pick their brain about their stance and why they do it, and kind of share tips and stuff like that. And that was one of the things that I did when I was early on in the MLL. I would really study some of the other goalies and watch what they do, and really try to mimic some of their style if they're being effective and so forth. So yeah, I think I had some things that I adjusted as I progressed through my career.
That's great. Do you recommend, youth that are out there today do that? There's a lot of video right now on YouTube and whatnot of college and pro goalies. Would you recommend that they sort of do that same thing that you did, looking at different style of play and kind of mimicking what works?
Yeah, I believe so. I think there's so obviously I like all goalies, I do a lot of goalie training with young players, some all different ages, even some college guys like to come in and get some workouts and so forth. But I've talked to there's a few goalies that I work with that I've even told them hey, I'm not going to critique you too much anymore unless you're asking my opinion, because I feel like they're doing such a good job, and they got recruited to college, and so it's okay, well, let's stay with what's working for you. It might be a little bit different than I would normally teach somebody, but you're being really effective if I believe that, and so I think it's good for goalies to get really comfortable in the way they play, which gives them more confidence, and sometimes learning it themselves and they'll believe in it, versus me having to remind them hey, you got to do this, you got to do this. And then it's I'm one of their parents. But if they're owning that, that feeling of hey, this is my stance, then I feel like they're going to play with a little bit more confidence, versus always having that feeling that, oh, I might be doing something wrong and that's why I got scored on. So, Yeah, I think once I feel like a goalie's gotten to a certain level, I let them kind of stay with what they're doing. Otherwise, if they tell me that they want me to adjust something, then I'll make those adjustments. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I think I've written on the blog before that, lacrosse goalie coach, well, really a lacrosse coach just in general, you have a lot of roles. And sometimes that role is teaching them technique. But like you said, sometimes that role is being a motivator or, some other aspect where you're not necessarily grilling them on technique. You're just there motivating them and pushing them to get better. And that's kind of sounds like what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. And then what did your goalie training regiment look like back in the day, just in terms of like the workouts and how you like to take shots or different goalie drills that you like to do? What did that look like?
Yeah, lots of jumping rope. I think that was that's something that when I first went to college, my college coach told me you got to get a jump rope, you got to be jumping rope. And so a lot of jumping rope. When I was in college, I would play a lot of squash with the other goalies. And just because to try to have like quick feet and reaction time and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time doing a lot of that stuff. A lot of core workouts, a lot of jumping, like box jumps, ladder drills, just going for runs to stay in shape, but then finish the workout with doing a lot of like plyometric type of jumping exercises and stuff like that. So even when I was, like if I would ever do squats, I would do it with lower weight and, just do a lot of body weight squats where I was jumping or like, take a 25-pound plate and do jumps with it instead of, squatting a lot of weight and so forth. So, just a lot of like explosive leg exercises. I would spend a lot of time doing that. Shots are obviously good. The one thing about, for me, I've always been a guy that's been, it didn't matter if like somebody was throwing the ball with their hands or using a lacrosse stick. I just wanted to just always be like moving my body, like getting my body behind the ball and, using my hands or using my stick and just getting as much of that in as possible. Especially when I was getting ready for a season or so forth.
Awesome. Yeah, I jumped a lot of rope as well. I wrestled in high school, and like jumping rope became my number one thing. Squash, that's a great one. That is a great one. I played squash the other day. Man, that is tiring.
Yeah.
It's tough. Yeah. Cool. I guess with all that experience that you have now going through, college career, MLL career, coaching, what goalie advice would you give your younger self, say your high school self?
Well, I think when I was in high school, ironically, because I came from playing offense to then playing goalie, it was a weird dynamic because like I really still loved playing offense. I just loved lacrosse in general, and whenever there was like a pickup game, I wanted to be on the field, and I didn't actually want to play in the goal a lot because it was almost something that I had to do, and that, as opposed to wanting to do. Like I feel like if we had another goalie on my high school team, I would have never have played goalie, and so I think one of the things that I would go back and tell myself is like, hey, you're really good at this. Stay with it, and train more, and kind of like live in that moment. Versus what I would actually want to do is play offense or be out on the field more. And so, I didn't realize how good I was at playing goalie until I went on to play in college. And I wish I would have like realized that a little bit earlier on, and played a little bit more and trained a little bit more on the position in high school.
I guess at what point did you realize, wow, this goalie thing really is for me?
I would probably say like after my senior year of high school. So I went obviously I graduated from Falmouth High School, and then I did a post-grad year at a private school in New Hampshire called New Hampton. And ironically, I went to that school for hockey because I thought I was going to go play college hockey. And once I went to private school, the lacrosse coach was a former goalie, and couple times, like as soon as I got to campus, I was like, "Hey, coach, I play goalie." And he was like, "All right, great, let's work together." And then like after the first day, he was like, "Yo, man, you're really, really good. Like you should look at college for lacrosse instead of hockey." And so that was like a big kind of turning point for me to really like, to go in that direction. And like I said, I wish I would have like realized that sooner and spent more time going to like recruiting type of events when I was growing up, because I really didn't do a lot of that stuff because I was focusing more on hockey at the time.
Mm-hmm. It is good to hear that story though, because I think some kids contact me and feel like they've missed out on things because it's a little late in the game. But like I said before in this conversation, goalies can blossom real quick, right? And you can even get
Right.
way better within college and take your game to that next level. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. What about when you were a backup goalie? How did you handle that situation? Continuing to improve and get better while not necessarily getting the runs with the number one starters.
Well, are you referring to when I was in high school, or just like at any point when I was a backup goalie, maybe like in the MLL?
Yeah, at any point, really.
Well, there's always that feeling of, if you ever get pulled out of a game, there's that immediate feeling of like, wow, this is kind of embarrassing, because you're like everybody's looking at you. You're coming out of the cage, somebody else is going in, and so what I realized is that sometimes a decision to take a goalie out of the game like doesn't mean that people don't like you. It doesn't mean that that you're bad. It could mean that just you might not be seeing the ball that day, or the other team's just really good at shooting that day, and we got to mix things up, kind of like a pitcher in baseball, where sometimes some of the best pitchers in the world still get home runs hit off of them, and they got to mix things up. It just wasn't their day. And so I know anytime that's happened to me, I try to look at it and say, you know what, the best way for me to deal with this is be a really, really good teammate, support my fellow goalie, the guy that's because if I was a starter, I was wanting somebody to support me. And so I made sure that I was like bringing a water bottle out to the goalie as he was coming off, maybe give him some like advice, give him a pat on the back, make sure that he's like doing well, and ask him if he wants any pointers or anything like that. So I know that it's tough sometimes because everybody wants to be on the field, but if you're not, you still want your team to win. And so let's try to boost the confidence of the guy that's playing and really kind of support him and be a good teammate, because if you are the starter, you would want your backup goalie to try to give you that support, as opposed to always have this like, oh, I wish I was the guy, mentality. Everybody wants that, and that might be the case, but you don't need to be telling people that. You don't need to be, giving that impression to your teammates.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's a tough thing to describe. Like sometimes goalies, I mean, I've been pulled from a game myself, and it was just because I was not picking up the ball that day. If you're playing like an away game and it's kind of unfriendly background, or just a background you're not used to, it's a tough thing to describe. But I like that comment that you made of just don't take that personally, and it could be like switching it up. Like a pitcher in baseball. Now instead of one style, they see another. Instead of one height, they see another. Instead of a lefty, they see a righty, or something like that. And yeah, obviously the points about being a great teammate are just spot on.
Right. It's kind of like a backup quarterback in football. You want your team to win, but you want your opportunity out there, but you can't make it too noticeable.
Yeah, and you got to prepare. You got to be ready for that opportunity. So whether that means kind of getting in some extra looks before practice or after, the starter might be, there's always one injury or one bad game away from getting pulled. So you got to be ready.
Right. Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the mental game. Obviously, being mentally strong, mentally tough is a huge element of being a great lacrosse goalie. But what were some things that you do or did to remain mentally tough?
I think a lot of it comes from